know about you, but I remember as a kid thinking that Christmas was always so far away, thinking Christmas would never come. I remember one year making one of those paper chains to count down the days to Christmas. I don't know if you ever did this or did this with your kids, but you take construction paper, cut it out into strips and glue or tape them together and then into a chain. And then each morning you can rip off one of those and count down to Christmas. I'm sure my mom helped me do this because I was incessantly asking, when's Christmas going to be here? Instead of her having to tell me every day, she could just refer to the paper chain and said, I don't know, we'll count the dang chains on the dang loops left on the chain, and then you'll know how many days left are till Christmas. And excitement filled the air day by day as another chain would come off. And then on Christmas Eve would get here. We would go to my grandparents' house, and my mom and dad always wanted to leave early. I never understood that because it was my grandparents' house. That's where I wanted to live anyways. But they made me go home early before everybody else and to get home so I could get in bed early. But the excitement was so much, and I couldn't sleep. I don't know about you when you were younger, if the Christmas Eve excitement just made you not be able to sleep, and that's the way it was for me. And the anticipation, the eagerness for what was to come is what made this happen, because I just hoped that on Christmas morning there'd be some magic or something would be a blessing. And truth be told, when I think back about my childhood and think back about the Christmases, I remember more about the feelings of waiting and anticipation more so than I have specific memories about Christmas morning. The memories I have about Christmas morning all kind of run together of my dad cooking breakfast and of sitting around the hearth in our family room. But the feelings of anticipation and eagerness leading up to Christmas is what I think I recall the most. And now, as we are making our final preparations for Christmas this year in life today, it has me beginning to feel a bit of this excitement again. I mean, I can't even believe that I'm actually admitting to this, but I'm beginning to feel a bit of excitement. And I'll admit that sometimes I can be a bit of a Scrooge or a Grinch when it comes to decorating for Christmas and getting ready for Christmas. I mean, I am not the one that's trying to get the Christmas tree out, because I know that once you decorate for Christmas, there's going to come a day when you have to undecorate for Christmas or take it all down and box it away. And I don't like doing any of that. And I don't care about doing any of that, but something happens when the garland is hung, when the tree is up, and I start to feel that excitement and anticipation come just a little bit more. I'm sure this excitement and anticipation has deep roots in my childhood and the traditions that tells us what we're supposed to feel this time of year. A culture shapes our expectations too, and you don't have to look far to hear the feelings that we're told leading up to Christmas. All you have to do is turn on the radio or open a Christmas playlist, and you'll hear, it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? Where with the kids jingle belling and everyone telling you, be of good cheer. It's the happiest season of all. You don't have to look far to hear that. And while this is just one song, a song that's loved by many, it reflects a larger message in the culture around us. It's a message that Christmas is supposed to be full of happiness and parties and warm feelings. And as much as culture tells us that this is the most wonderful time of the year, for many, there are other emotions that surface as well. For many, this season is marked by stress and anxiety. Last year, I think I talked about stress some if you were with us last week, but I want to look at it even more this week, because last year, the American Psychological Association did some research just last year in 2023 and found that 9 and 10 adults in the United States said that there's something during the holiday season was causing them stress. 90% of people in the United States say that there's something related to the holidays that's causing them stress. For many, it was money or the absence of loved ones or family conflict that was coming down that they knew was coming to their household or knew that was happening. But 90% of U.S. adults reported to feeling stressed during the holidays. Now, stress is got pluses and minuses, but for some it was even worse. For 43% of U.S. adults, they said that this holiday stress interferes so much with their daily life that they're not even able to enjoy the holidays. So that nearly half of U.S. adults, if you fudge the numbers a little bit, right? Nearly half of U.S. adults say that stress around the holiday season is so bad and so hard that they're not even able to enjoy the holiday season. And when I think about it, when I think about the stress that people are feeling, I realize, there's joy this season, yes. There's also stress, anxiety, expectations, conflicts, traditions that people are juggling, different families that people are juggling, different people are trying to make happy. Combine that with feelings of loss and financial pressures that others are facing. And when I think about it, much of our culture says that this is a time to be happy because Christmas is near. But if you're not feeling particularly happy, it can lead to even more stress. But what if happiness isn't the goal? What if happiness wasn't the goal of Christmas or the holidays? What if there's something else that could bring true meaning this time of year, regardless of what you're feeling? To help us experience this and explore this, I want to share with you some of a letter that this guy named Paul wrote to some Christians living in the ancient town of Philippi. If you were with us last week, we talked about this same writing, the same passage or the same book in the Bible that Paul wrote to the Philippian Christians. And these were people that were facing struggles in their own life, and Paul is writing to them to give them a good word. Paul knew who they were and wanted to encourage them. And what you also have to know about Paul at this time is that he had traveled the world trying to spread the life-changing love of Jesus with people and to help people find and follow Jesus. And at this time in Paul's life, he's in prison. It's not the first time he's in prison either. And in fact, this time Paul is realizing that he may not even make it out of prison, that he might be facing death while he's in prison. But even still, he couldn't stop sharing about the love of Jesus. And in the face of this, he writes to the Philippians. So if you want to follow along in your own Bible, I want to invite you to turn with me to Philippians chapter 4. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 4. Here Paul writes this: "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation with prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ." Now, I have to confess, when I read this passage first off and just kind of look at it, it makes me think about those paper chain countdowns, because as you count down, it gets closer, and my heart starts to flutter a little bit and think, how many sleeps, when you have little kids, you think in terms of sleeps for days. How many sleeps do we have left for Christmas till Christmas? Like the anxiety starts to build up. How many more days does Amazon going to deliver a package to get here by Christmas time? Is the package that I ordered that might be from some scam website, is it actually going to get here before Christmas? And I start to worry and start to think about this. And if you're wondering, there's like 10 sleeps until Christmas. So there's not much time left, right? And as I read these words from Paul, I begin to think, is he just trying to add more excitement, more anxiety about rejoicing and rejoicing again, he says. And when I begin to read these words, rejoice in the Lord always, again I say rejoice, I start to think, that's a little much. Why are you trying to add something else? That kind of adds a lot of pressure. That's a little much. And in ways, I think that it can kind of seem like Paul is encouraging you to have the happiest season of all. Just this more requirements and more anxiety. But if you look closer, I think what we begin to see is not just another checklist or another countdown. It's not another wish list or shopping list in what Paul has to say. Instead, Paul is giving us something else. He's giving you and me a list for blessing at Christmas. Not a list of the things you need to buy or the things you need to do, but a list of how to receive blessing in the midst of whatever is going on. Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. He shares with us the quality of joy here, but he says it twice. He says it twice. It's as if he's writing, remember he's in prison, and Paul is writing, and he says, rejoice in the Lord always. And he starts to think about where he is. It's like, wait a minute. Rejoice in the Lord always. Wait a minute. The darkness is encircling me. I'm in prison and it's cold here, and I don't know if I'm going to even get out of here. In fact, he's facing almost certain death by this point in his ministry, and he's writing to tell people to rejoice. He's like, I'm not, maybe this isn't the right place, right thing for me to be saying at this time. And then maybe his mind switches to his audience, the Philippian Christians, and he realizes that they are struggling too, that he knows that they face dangers and they face persecutions. I mean, they could be right behind him, living in prison. And he stops to wonder, do I really mean what I'm saying? Is this really the message I want to give to people, to rejoice even when things are hard? But then he snaps out of it. He snaps out of that thought and says, you know what? I know what I'm saying. You know what? I do know what I'm saying. In fact, even as darkness may be encircling, I know what I'm saying. I know what could happen. And I know that there can be pain and there can be hardships. But I'll say it again. Rejoice. Rejoice. This call to rejoice, the joy that it brings is distinct from the glib assertions that this is the happiest season of all. I mean, Christmas songs and holiday advertisement urge you to be happy and full of glee because Christmas is near. And many people find that in the midst of this happiness, it can be missing. And in the midst of that, maybe you feel sad or anxious or stressed. And then for the rest of you, if you're like, well, I'm not feeling sad or anxious or stressed, but you also know that the happiness and glee of the season, it's not going to last because the batteries run out of the toys, the food, the leftovers end up spoiling, the wrapping paper has to be thrown away, the Christmas tree has to be boxed up, and the toys that many of our children will open on Christmas morning, they will lose interest in the matter of a few days or weeks. Many are happy because Christmas is here or is near, but happiness like this will fade. You know, happiness is often an emotional state that is tied to external circumstances. So whatever's going on externally, you can have happiness because you see things are going well. I mean, kids are happy on Christmas morning because they got what they want from Santa Claus and from family and friends. Many are happy because Christmas is coming and is close, but joy is different. Joy is different than this happiness that can disappear. Joy is something else. Joy is a long-lasting state of being and contentment. Joy is something that is not related to your external circumstances. The joy that Paul is speaking here is even deeper than that. The joy that Paul is talking about is something that you're able to have because the continual presence of Jesus is the source of joy. For those who are in the Lord, as Paul says, you can have joy even in the midst of hardships. I mean, Paul, he's writing, and he himself, he's in prison at the time. And he says, even though he's in prison, that you can even have joy in the face of this reality. Joy doesn't come from external realities. Joy comes from your proximity and closeness to God. And Paul writes that the Lord is near. And because God is near to you, that you can have joy, that joy can be yours regardless of what's going on in your life. Biblical commentator, a guy by the name of William Barclay, he writes that Christians can never lose their joy because they can never lose Christ. Christians can never lose their joy because they can never lose Christ, because Christ is the source of the joy that Paul is encouraging you with. The world says, be happy because Christmas is near. But Paul says, have joy because the Lord is near. Have joy because the Lord is near. And while the world and culture and tradition will give you checklists and to-do lists for the holidays, articles and advertisements giving you those best and last-minute gifts under $100 or under $25 that you can get for the person who has everything, the joy of the Lord gives differently. The joy of the Lord gives differently. The joy of the Lord gives us only a list of things that really matter this time of year. It's kind of a list that we have of how to experience blessing at Christmas, and it's what Paul is trying to tell us in this passage from Philippians. And the first thing on this list is something that we've already said. It's don't seek happiness in the world, but instead find joy in the Lord who is near. Find joy in the Lord who is near. This time of year, we think a lot about preparing for Christmas, but in the church, we don't actually call this season the season of Christmas. Sometimes we refer to this as the Christmas season, but in the church, if we really look into our deep traditions, we don't call this season the season of Christmas. Instead, we call this the season of Advent. And Advent comes from this Latin word that means coming. And Advent is designed to help followers of Jesus to prepare for the coming of Jesus. And an ancient monk, a monk from the 12th century, a guy by the name of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, he taught that there were three distinct times that Christ comes. And the first is the most obvious, when Christ first came at Christmas. Born to Mary, came into the world. This is the nativity that we celebrate on Christmas Eve and celebrate every single year around this time. But he also said that there's another coming, when the second coming of Christ, when Christ will come again. And Christ will come again in final victory, and all will be set right, and people will be gathered in, and judgment will come, and peace will come ultimately and finally. But there's a third coming, and that is Christ's continual coming into our hearts every day. The way that Christ is present in your heart and the hearts of those who follow Jesus. And it's this third coming, Christ coming into your heart daily, where you can experience the joy of the Lord, the real joy of the Lord, because in this, God is truly near. Jesus is truly near. The second thing on this list for blessing at Christmas is that prayer can be an antidote to anxiety. We've already talked about how stressful and anxiety-filled the holidays can be. And even when you're trying to find joy in the Lord, it can still feel difficult because stress and anxiety can threaten to overtake you. But Paul says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Paul is telling you, you don't have to be anxious. Instead, pray about it. And that can seem glib, I know, but I love how another translation from the mid-20th century, a translation that's kind of obscure, but it's called the Phillips Bible translation, and it's kind of a paraphrase. And this paraphrase translates this text as saying, don't worry about anything whatsoever. Just kind of casual. Don't worry about anything whatsoever. Tell God every detail of your needs in earnest and thankful prayer. Just tell God of your needs in earnest and thankful prayer. And when stress comes in, when anxiety threatens to overtake you, bring it to God. Tell God about it. And the reason that Paul invites you to do this, invites you to tell God about the stress and anxiety and whatever you're holding in your heart, the reason that Paul says God invites you to do this is the third thing on our list for blessing at Christmas. It's that the result of this is that God's peace will guard you. God's peace will guard you. Paul says in verse 7, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This peace of God is the result of God being near. It's the result of God hearing your prayer. And I want you to know that this is not some mysterious peace that you can't understand. What Paul is saying here is that this peace that God gives is a peace that only God can give. It's not a peace that you can try to build on yourself. It's not a peace that you could ever do anything to produce yourself. It's a peace that only comes from God. And when God gives you that peace, God will guard your heart and your mind. And the language that Paul uses here is very specific. The word guard is actually a military term in the original context. And it's a term, the picture that Paul is painting here is that God is this military guard, kind of a sentry standing guard over your heart. It's not just it's not a superficial or some light thing, that this is powerful language that Paul is trying to say that God really will stand guard, as an armed guard perhaps, over your heart. God's peace is given to you, and God promises to stand guard, protecting and safeguarding you, whatever may come. And the fourth and final thing on this list for blessing at Christmas is something that you can actively do. It comes from what Paul says next, and I didn't read this yet. It comes from verse 8 and 9 in chapter 4 from Philippians. Here's what he says. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the peace of God and the God of peace will be with you. So here, Paul asks the people, after he gives them these assurances that God will guard them, that they can find joy in the Lord regardless of what's going on, Paul asks them to do something about it. He asks them to think about the things that are true and noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable. And then not only to think about them, but to put them into practice, to do these things. And when you do this, the peace of God will be with you. The fourth item on this list for blessing is to practice joy and peace. To practice joy and peace. Your mind is always going to focus on something. Something is always going to be on your mind and focus on your mind. And if your mind is filled with stress and worry, it's only going to reinforce those feelings. If wherever you're thinking about and doing in your mind is thinking about the things that are wrong or the things that are stressful or the things that are sad or difficult in life, your mind is only going to reinforce these feelings. And Paul wanted to ensure the Philippians and you that you would take the blessings of God and set your mind on the right things. If you think about something enough, if you think about something often enough, what it does is it kind of puts grooves in your mind. It puts grooves in your mind like grooves on a worn surface. And when you have those grooves, all you can do is you just end up going there, like a record that's skipping, like grooves in a pathway. That's the path that you go. That's the path that you walk. And what happens is that you get stuck in these grooves time and again, and it's hard to get out. Paul says, keep your thoughts away from these things. Instead, set them on what's good. You know, many things in the world are deceptive. Many things promise what they cannot deliver. Think about the world's image for Christmas. It's the happiest season of all, right? For some, it's happy, but for others, it's an illusion. Instead, Paul tells you to set your thoughts on things that won't let you down. On things that don't disappoint, on things that are not an illusion, to set your mind on good things, on the things of God, and to put them into practice, rejoicing, prayer, goodness, practice these things. And when you practice these things, when you do this, you experience blessing. When you do this at Christmas, you receive blessing. When you do this, new pathways are formed, new grooves are formed to help you stay in this same thought, to help you stay in God's peace, to help you stay in God's blessing, to help you avoid the pain and the hardship of other feelings. Rejoicing, prayer, and goodness. Practice these things. When you do this at Christmas, you'll receive blessing. When you do this, peace and joy from God will be with you. Oh, friends, culture says, be happy because Christmas is near. But faith says, have joy because the Lord is near. Have joy because the Lord is near. Don't be consumed by the checklists and the shopping lists and the stress. Instead, receive and live the list for blessing at Christmas. Rejoice because the Lord is near. Well, friends, I want to spend just a moment here, and I want to pray for you. Pray for you and whatever is going on in your life, and hope and pray that you will experience this joy, that you will walk and put this joy into practice in your own life by doing the things that are from God and reinforcing that. I invite you to pray with me. God, I thank you. In the midst of our world, we know that there are pressures and hardships. We know that many are struggling this season, whether it's from sickness or mourning or just the stress, the general stress of the holidays. I pray right now that you will remove the temptations to try to to try to just experience happiness for a time, or you'll move the temptations of trying to get everything perfect, but instead replace it in an awareness that you are near, that your presence is near. And because you are near, that your followers can have joy. And if there's anyone who needs that this morning, I pray that they'll ask you to give it to them. Pray that they'll just respond to your presence in their lives. And help them practice the joy and the peace that you want for them. I give this all to you, most blessed God. In the name of Jesus, I pray.